We're very delighted to be able to welcome President Bill Clinton. He's agreed, very generously and kindly agreed to come and address us as they excel in London and really look at the core issues that is confronting worldwide poverty today. Because he's spent a lot of his time recently with his foundation, and they've looked at how to even the playing field between the affluent and the poor, and the subjects that will be able to address this rather quickly and accelerate poverty reduction anywhere in the world are the twin issues of education and that of technology, because technology is able to make us do things quicker, cheaper and better. And I don't think I should waste your time talking more about this. Let's go straight into the hall where President Bill Clinton is addressing an enthusiastic audience, rightly enthusiastic as well, in the Park Hall in the Excel in London, where he's really talking to us straight from his heart and what he's been passionate about in recent years. Thank you.
Set up this foundation so that I could pursue causes that I could still have an impact on as a private citizen. So I picked the things that I cared about, and I could do things that were quite important that governments normally don't do. You take any nation, you will find that intelligence, ability, aspiration are all evenly distributed across the society, but organization, investment, opportunity are not. When you get into this business, you have to recognize that a certain amount of humility is required. Governments with all their resources often fail to affect social change. So we're there to restore, if you will, the connection between people's efforts and actions and positive consequences. And you can't possibly do that kind of work unless you do it with other people. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, first, I apologize, but I couldnI really hear backstage, so I didn't know that I had been called up. Sit down. I want to thank Raymond and the organizers of the conference for inviting me, and I hope that I can say a few things that are relevant to your lives and concerns today. This is an important issue to me, and what happens in the UK is important to me and to the world. You know, I spend most of my time now, notwithstanding the recent election campaign in America, with my foundation. I work with all different kinds of people. Half the time in America and around the world, I don't even know what political party they belong to. We just agreed that we're going to tackle an opportunity or try to seize a responsibility and solve a problem. And I say our goal is to figure out how to do whatever it is we're doing faster, cheaper, and better than it was done before. In other words, I think like most of you have to think every day. And the one thing that concerns me about the way we do our business in the world is that there's a disconnect between the way politics works in many places and the way the rest of the world works. What is working all over the world is creative networks of cooperation, because there is an infinite amount of information out there and too few people who understand how to put it together. And nobody knows everything, and a broken clock is right twice a day. All of us spend our lives between those two extremes, wishing we knew everything and hoping to God we're right more than twice a day. So what works to solve problems in the private sector, to create opportunity, to support entrepreneurs, coming up with a new idea that has merit and can generate something people want or solve a problem, and then figuring out how to do it. For most of the years I spent in politics, we largely debated two questions. What are you going to do? And how much money are you going to devote to it? There was almost no focus on the third question, which I believe is the 21st century's most important question, which is whatever you propose to do, and however much money you have or do not have, how do you propose to do it? How do you propose to turn your good intentions into a positive change? For me, that normally involves trying to change people's lives. And I'll give you just one example. We're working our way out of this global financial crisis now. And I suppose I should apologize to everyone here since it started in the United States. But it is an illustration of the degree to which we are interdependent, the degree to which our borders now look far more like nets than walls. And a lot of this interdependence is great. I mean, look around this crowd. Can you imagine this crowd appearing at an event like this 30 years ago? 30 years ago, this crowd would have been older, whiter, and more male. It's a lot more interesting for me to look at you. I mean, 30 years ago, I would have gazed out on a crowd full of people who looked like me, old gray-haired white guys in suits. I will say, now that I have become one, I'm glad to look out at the crowd and see that my demographic has not been entirely eliminated. Thank you very much for allowing us to be a part of your gathering. There are a lot of great things about the modern world. 8-year-old kid could get on the internet and find out something in 30 seconds I had to go to university to learn. That's the good news. The bad news is, depending on what the site is, you have no earthly idea whether it's true or not, but you can get a lot of information. But the modern world is bedeviled by three huge interconnected challenges. First, it is entirely too unequal. There aren't enough jobs, they don't pay enough, all over the world. In the UK and the US, you have persistent pockets of people who are smart and willing to work, who can't find a way into this world that the rest of us are taking advantage of. India has the world's largest middle class and the world's largest number of really poor people. Both India and China have a hard time connecting the centers of their prosperity with the people who live in small towns and rural areas, and so do we in America. So do all places of vast geographic expanse. It's quite interesting that size used to be a high predictor of the ability to produce broad-based prosperity. Now, look around Europe, or look at Africa, look at any place. People who live in countries that are compact, where people live close together and have easy access to each other and common resources, tend to have more luck in generating economic opportunity and then making sure that the circle of opportunity encompasses pretty close to everybody. So the world is unequal in terms of economic opportunity and by extension in terms of access to education, healthcare, capital, and a whole range of other things. And this inequality, besides being a personal and social tragedy, is a severe constraint on a nation's growth. Every time a first-generation immigrant doesn't finish school, it hurts that person. It hurts the country where she or he lives. And we have to do something about it. We have to find a way to make our economic models more employment intensive. The second problem the world has is that it is too unstable. Instability is essential in a market economy. If you're going to reward success, there has to be the possibility of failure. And then people have to be able to pick themselves up off the ground and begin again. I lost 2 elections. A lot of my friends in business have failed and succeeded. But if there is too much instability, you might as well have a static society because people become so scared things shut down. That's what always happens after a financial crisis, and has for centuries. And what we're still trying to claw our way out of. In the United States today, we have fixed yesterday's problems, which societies are very good at. We're very good at fixing yesterday's problems. Not so good at predicting tomorrow's and converting them. So we have the best capitalized banks we've had in 20 years. But they're not making a lot of loans, especially to smaller enterprises who need something on the order of $200,000, $100,000 or less. We have set up these rules to try to prevent the last crisis. We don't know if they're too burdensome on the community banks that are trying to generate small business growth. We're still trying to work through all that. So that's an example of instability. The fear of cyber terrorism, the vulnerability we all have to acts of violence perpetrated for various political means. All of these things add instability to a society in ways that are destructive, not constructive. So the trick of the 21st century will be how to maintain enough instability to reward enterprise and good ideas and hard work and the ability to lead and the ability to entertain us in sport and music and all of that, but not to have so much instability that things shut down. And then we have to have these years dragging along as if we have chains on our feet, which is what is frustrating people in Europe and the U.S. and elsewhere. If you have too much, it's a severe constraint on growth and opportunity. And finally, the world is not sustainable because of the way we produce and consume energy and other more localized resources. We just had our second major hurricane hit the northeast United States, which used to be all but unheard of. No one can say global warming caused these hurricanes. But it is clear that the oceans are warmer and that warmer ocean waters lead to more severe storms. And that they're warmer for us further north. It is clear that 90% of the ice pack on the top of Greenland, which contains 8% of the world's fresh water, suffered melt this summer and the 100-year average is 50%. If all that water melts, it could be big trouble for you. Because if 8% of the world's fresh water falls into the North Atlantic, it could block the Gulf Stream, which is what keeps Northern Europe tolerable in the winter. And some of the world's most productive economies could revert to the temperatures of the little ice age 700 years ago with calamitous consequences for 3 or 4 months a year. That's how it could affect you. Meanwhile, the most vulnerable countries to climate change are among the poorest. And if we just listen to the insurance and reinsurance companies who have an immediate stake, we are now in the second decade in a row where payouts by insurance companies for natural disasters have tripled the previous decade. Climate change is posing the risk that people in some areas near oceans where people love to live are going to become virtually uninsurable. And we have this crazy situation in America where one of our political parties still denies the reality of climate change, but members of those parties who happen to be mayors of cities along the coastline are working with their insurers to build back, to build up, to dig deep, so that they can get insurance. So they believe in what their ideology compels them to disavow. That's our problem, not yours. But it will be your problem if America doesn't do something serious. We have cut our aggregate emissions dramatically in the last 2 years, only partly because of the economic slowdown, largely because we're shutting our coal-fired electric plants and substituting natural gas, and because we're finally getting into the solar and wind business in a big way. But if you just look at the vistas of opportunities you have, and then you think about everything that could go wrong, almost everything could be clumped into one of these 3 categories. The world is too unequal, it is too unstable, and it is unsustainable. And so I basically try to spend my life trying to figure out how to build up the positive and reduce the negative forces of our global interdependence in a way that creates more space for people to live their dreams, pursue their hopes, and be empowered to do so. I think a big part of that is trying to integrate dealing with these things into business models, and for the non-governmental organizations, the NGO movement, to try to lead coalitions of the private sector and government into being more entrepreneurial. When I was president, we got an enormous number of our new jobs from small business. But the small businesses were being spurred by the fact that information technology in the 1990s spread into every aspect of the economy. So that when I look back on those 8 years, IT employment was only 8% of the total, but it was more than 20% of the growth and more than 25% of the wage growth of the country. It's the only time since the 1980s in our country when the bottom 20% earnings in percentage terms increased as much as the top 20%. We have to find ways to try to create this kind of entrepreneurial culture where we all focus more on what works. Let me back up and say one thing. I find that the problems of dealing with these challenges and seizing the opportunities manifest themselves very differently in poor countries, in rising economies, and in developed countries. And you may be able to identify with some of this in the work you do. But in really poor countries, what they often need are basic systems that many of you are in the process of leaving behind. You have enough money to have solar panels on your roof or a windmill on your farm. You may not need the grid. But if you live in Haiti, 85% of the people have no electricity at all in their homes. They need systems. Systems that you never even think about. Just think about all the stuff we're taking for granted here. You'd be surprised at the screen. If you get really bored with my speech, you can excuse yourself. You can go to the loo or get a glass of water. I spend a lot of my time in places where people can't take any of that for granted. In a stunning metaphor of the challenges faced by poor countries, the microphone failed when the president of Haiti was giving his inaugural address. Turned out it was a person who opposed him who actually cut the cord, so we fixed it. So I spend a lot of my time just trying to help build these systems. In China, Russia, India, Brazil, Mexico, the centers of prosperity have these systems, but they're trying to figure out how to spread them. So they have to both figure out how to keep on this modernization path they're on and how to connect to people who aren't part of it at all. Rich countries have systems, but they tend to become rigidified, more interested in holding on to present gain than creating future opportunity, more interested in holding on to position than advancing the purpose for which the institutions were set up in the first place. This is basic human nature. It's as old as the Sumerian civilization 8,000 years ago. It's always what tests advanced societies. And it's really hard when these systems have to multitask, which is basically what Europe and America are facing now. If you have a lot of big structural debt that can't be handled over the long run, you have to retrench. If you retrench too soon in an economic downturn, you make the situation worse. That's the dilemma that the UK faces, that the Eurozone faces, that America faces. So what I've been trying to argue for the last few years in America is we should have a 10-year plan to reduce our debt that should trigger ever more steeply as economic growth returns. Then you're blocking the rise of high interest rates. If you do it too soon, what happens? You just stay flat because you cannot possibly, no matter how much you cut spending or raise taxes, revenues will still drop and your deficits will go up because once interest rates are below the rate of inflation, that tells you that there's not enough private activity and the public sector has to do something to keep trying to spark economic growth. When private activity takes off, there'll be more demand for capital, interest rates will rise, you can worry about the deficit. So the markets say, no, you have these unsustainable debts. We want to see that you're serious. Well, you can show them that you're serious, but if you act like you are before the time comes, all you do is make the debt worse. So this is a sort of challenging governmental decision that all of society has to be involved in. On the other hand, it's a great time to start a business if you can figure out what it's going to look like 5 years from now. When things are bad, it's a good time to move. If you're gifted with the ability to have a good sense of what will be needed when things aren't so bad anymore. So in that maelstrom, we need more innovators. We need more people who can imagine a future that is different from the past. Not people that are just focused on fixing something that happened yesterday so it doesn't happen again. And I personally believe one of the great challenges, not only for government, but for big private economic organizations and for NGOs, is to figure out how to become constant innovators, how to become relentlessly future-focused, how to look at a situation that seems irreconcilable and just try something. The great thing I like about being in the position I'm in now with an NGO is, unlike a business, I don't have to answer to my investors, but I'm not a public company. They don't expect me to run a profit. All I have to do is balance the books. Unlike a politician, which I was happily for nearly 30 years, if I screw up, I can say I did. This is important. We should start rewarding politicians for saying, I tried this, it didn't work, I failed, I stopped, now let's do something else. I wish there was I wish one of these organizations that gives people awards would set up an award system for innovative political leaders who try things that don't work, admit it to their voters, say we tried this, here's why we tried it, it didn't work, we stopped, we're not wasting your money anymore, and here's what we learned, so we're going to try that. Think how real it would be. It would be so much better than, in politics, people are so afraid of bad press articles, they spend way too much time and energy trying to cover their backside. And it's not conducive to the kind of entrepreneurial, creative, decision-making process that we all desperately need in every part of our society. So I like it when people ask me, what do you think the biggest mistakes you made were as president? If you had to do over, what would you change? I like that. Because it's inconceivable that a person could make thousands and thousands and thousands of decisions with imperfect information in a limited time frame and never err. And the idea that we have to create this sort of mythical image of people, instead of realizing, I hired a person to do a job. They made a lot of decisions. The end result was good. Not all the decisions worked out so well. Here were the ones that didn't work out so well and what we can learn from it. We need to create this kind of climate in the political systems of every country on earth. We all say we want innovators, we want people with an entrepreneurial spirit. You have to have the right to fail and admit it so you can succeed. Because if everyone knew what to do about every inequality, instability, and unsustainability challenge in the world, I'd be here talking about something else because all those problems would be solved. But let me just give you a few examples. When I left the White House in 2001, we had just arranged to set up the Global Fund for AIDS, TB, and malaria, but it had not yet been funded. The American program, which provides a lot of the world's funding that President Bush started, PEPFAR, had not yet been funded. So Nelson Mandela and I were going around the world rattling a tin cup trying to raise money to fight AIDS because only 200,000 people in the developing world were getting AIDS medicine. And even then, 6 million needed it to stay alive. And I had this incredible encounter in Barcelona with the Prime Minister of a small Caribbean country, St. Kitts and Nevis, who is a medical doctor. And keep in mind, this is 11 years ago. So he says to me, look, Bill, we don't have a denial problem on AIDS. We don't have a discrimination problem. We have a money and an organization problem. I said, well, what do you want me to do about it? He said, I want you to fix it. Now, at the time, I had about 8 employees. and I was busy building a library, which is something former presidents normally do, build a library, museum, and public policy center. And I was trying to build America's first graduate school in public service as opposed to public policy, which we did. It's the only place where you spend half your time in the field solving problems and only half your time in the classroom.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you were not disappointed with the electrifying speech by President Bill Clinton. If you do require further assistance, I advise you to click on the link below and we can send you more information about books written by Bill Clinton, more about the work of the Clinton's Foundation, more about the work of the Prince's Trust, because today's event was made possible in part by the Prince's Trust, Clinton Foundation, and all the EIE Excellence in Education students that were able to attend. Please remember you're still going to write a synopsis of what you heard, the lessons you learned, and how you hope to change one or two aspects of your life from now on. So click below and get more information about the Clinton Foundation, about books written by President Clinton or books written about President Clinton, and any other person that would like to support inner city kids, poverty reduction, and supporting education to the less privileged. Please click below and we'll ship you as much information as possible. Thank you. I hope you were not disappointed by that electrifying speech by President Clinton. Thank you.